Before I knew it, time had passed quite a while, and I could see the sunset already. I told my daughter it was time to get out of the sea. At that moment, I didn't have a good feeling about everything that was going to happen. My husband Mason and my mother-in-law Amelia's luggage was gone. Then I heard the sound of a boat going forward with its engines roaring. To my surprise, Mason had gotten on the boat and left me and my daughter by the sea. "Hey, why are you leaving us?" I swam up to the boat in a panic. But even though it was a small boat, I couldn't catch up to it, and there was a possibility that I might get hurt if I tried to reach for the boat. "It's not like we're related by blood anyways, so this should be fine," Mason suddenly said as I got close to the boat. I was so stunned. Then Amelia looked out from the boat and said while laughing, "Ha, look at that dumb face." Mason looked at me with disdain, and then the boat left me and my daughter behind. My name is Sophia, and I'm a 31-year-old housewife. I live with my husband Mason and our 8-year-old daughter Isabella. Isabella is always working hard in her studies and sports, and she also practices hard every day for her piano lessons, which she has been learning since she was 5 years old. Isabella is really cute, and she's my treasure. My life with Isabella is full of happiness, but things were not going so well with Mason. Mason and I met about 9 years ago. I joined the company as a new employee, and Mason was 2 years my senior. We became close when my husband took on the role as my trainer for the OJT. I was attracted to him because he worked so hard and was carefully teaching me about my job, and we naturally got into a good relationship and began dating. After 2 years of dating each other, we got married. We had a great time as newlyweds. Mason took very good care of me, and I knew that he loved me dearly. When Isabella was born, he was saying she's like an angel and loved her because Mason loved her a lot. I thought that if Isabella says that she will get married in the future, he was going to faint or something. However, when Isabella was about 2 years old, Mason's attitude suddenly changed. He became very cold toward me and stopped caring about our daughter. I couldn't understand why he would not talk to me and would not hold or talk to Isabella anymore. After about a month of this, I reached my limit and questioned Mason. "Hey, why are you so distant from me and Isabella lately? Did I do something to offend you? I don't know what's causing you to be like this, and it's really bothering me." I think I shouted something like that to Mason. That's how confused I was about the sudden change in Mason's attitude. Then Mason calmly says, "This is because that child is not mine." I couldn't understand what he meant. Isabella is truly our child. What are you talking about? Just Isabella is definitely your daughter. I told him that, but he wouldn't listen to me because she doesn't look like me at all. You know, that's not true. She's only 2 years old now, so you can't really tell, but I'm sure that her resemblance to you will become more obvious in the future. No, you're wrong. I won't be fooled. She has green eyes, plus her eyes are pretty big. Ha, I have blue eyes, so there's no way I could have a beautiful baby with green eyes like this. My husband's shallow reasoning left me in a state of shock. No, I mean, look at me. I have green eyes, so that means she has the eyes just like mine. When I said this, Mason looked a little convinced, but perhaps his pride wouldn't allow it. He didn't agree with me. You're probably trying to deceive me by saying that. That's not true. You really have to believe me. Eventually, Mason asked for some time to think about it and went back to his parents' house. At that time, I remember starting to question his thoughts and began to distrust him. I wondered if we could build a proper family together as parents, let alone a marriage. After returning back to his parents, it seemed like Mason had explained the situation only from his point of view. So, Amelia called me and cursed me, saying, "You." After that, my in-laws and I had a discussion at their house, and we decided to do a DNA test to find out once and for all. Mason says even if we don't do that, it's obvious, and I know that she's not my child, but when I insisted on having the test done, he reluctantly agreed. After the test, it turned out that she was also Mason's child. My husband looked at me and said, convinced. "You're kidding." But my father-in-law, Pete, said, "The results came out. Why don't you just admit it and apologize to Sophia?" And because Pete shouted at him, Mason finally came to his senses. "Sophia, I'm sorry I doubted you. I don't know what's come over me." Mason bowed his head and apologized, so I forgave him. For now, I know some people would have gone for a divorce at this point, but I had become a housewife when I got married and was not making enough money. I felt bad about taking Isabella's own father away from her, who was only 2 years old at the time. Besides, after all, I had married after having fallen in love properly, and I didn't want to just get a divorce right away. However, I would later regret that I should have divorced Mason at the time. Thus, I continued the married life with Mason, but there was a somewhat awkward atmosphere with him still. Little by little, we began to talk more and more, and we began to feel like a married couple. For the time being, however, Mason didn't seem to be able to open up to Isabella. When I say, "Come on, Mason, play with her," he says, "Oh, yeah," and it becomes somewhat awkward. He would play with Isabella for a little bit, but then he would immediately say, "I think mothers are better for this," she said, and passed her to me. In the end, Mason hardly ever played with Isabella as she grew up. When Isabella was about 5 years old, she was very curious and interested in many things. She read a lot of books and always asked me questions when she didn't understand something. One day, she asked me about history, and I thought Mason, who was very good at world history, would be the better person to ask. So I told her that she should ask him because he knew more about it than I did. Then Isabella ran to Mason and asked him the question. I went out of my way to help improve the relationship between Mason and Isabella, but he turned her away by saying, "You'd get a better answer if you ask your mother." Isabella got confused and asked, "Well, who should I ask?" I went over to Mason and said, "Hey, Isabella is asking you, so you should pay more attention to her." To this, Mason says, "You're there for this kind of thing, so if you're there, then there's no need for me." I was indeed appalled to hear him say that. I wondered why he was so reluctant to spend time with Isabella. Isabella also seemed a little lonely because she was not being cared for by her father. I tried to find a way to make our family closer, but Mason would not make time for the family. Isabella is working hard at piano and studying, partly because she is a hard worker, but also because she wants her father to pay attention to her. My frustration towards Mason grew, and one night I took out my frustration on him. "That's enough. Why are you trying to avoid Isabella? She's trying so hard to get along with her father. You haven't even come to her piano recital, not once. Even when I get angry with Mason, it's as if I'm trying to get him to do something he doesn't want to do. Then Mason just says, I'm letting her do whatever she wants, so I am fulfilling my role as a father. You're too cold to your own daughter." When I told him that, he said, "I do wonder if she really is my child." "Huh? What the hell are you talking about? We had the DNA test." Even though I said that, Mason still looked unconvinced and just went back to his room. How on earth could I get Mason to change his mind? While I was worrying over this thought, Mason suddenly says, "Let's go on a trip to Hawaii with the whole family." He suggested that the 5 of us, including my in-laws, would go on the trip together. I was happy when I heard this. Mason was finally making time for his daughter, and Isabella would now be able to make happy memories with her own father. When we arrived there, Mason told me that he had booked a boat and took me and my daughter to the port. It was a small but magnificent boat, and I couldn't help but look forward to the day ahead. As we pushed the boat forward into the sea, my daughter also looked at the boat with a bright smile. Mason also has a boat driving license, so we decided to take the boat to a nearby deserted island. Today, my father-in-law, Pete, wanted to buy something and to visit his friend who was living in Hawaii, so he didn't join this time. Thus, Isabella, Mason, Amelia, and I decided to go to the deserted island. When we arrived at the deserted island, it was very beautiful. Isabella was very impressed. Mason had also prepared snorkeling equipment, and at first, he was happily diving into the water by himself. Then, after a little while, he invited Isabella and me to dive in with him. So, I put on my gear and dove into the water, as I had done a few times before. It was Isabella's first time, so Mason was carefully teaching her. Seeing her like that made me very happy that Mason was finally becoming more like a father. Isabella also seemed happy to have her own father teach her, and soon enough, she was getting the hang of it. Mason said, "I'm going to take a break," and got out of the water. So, I watched my daughter to make sure she didn't go too far and enjoyed diving into the water with her. Before I knew it, quite a while had passed, and I could already see the sunset. I told my daughter it was time to get out of the sea. At that moment, I didn't have a good feeling about everything that was to happen. My husband Mason and my mother-in-law Amelia's luggage were gone. Then I heard the sound of a boat going forward with its engines roaring. To my surprise, Mason had gotten on the boat and left me and my daughter by the sea. "Hey, why are you leaving us?" I swam up to the boat in a panic. But even though it was a small boat, I couldn't catch up to it, and there was a possibility that I might get hurt if I tried to reach for the boat. It's not like we're related by blood anyways, so this should be fine, I heard Mason say as I got close to the boat. I was so stunned. Then Amelia looked out from the boat and said while laughing, "Ha, look at that dumb face." Mason looked at me with disdain, and then the boat left me and my daughter behind. I quickly returned to the island and ran over to Isabella. Isabella looked terrified. Were we stranded here? I hugged Isabella, who was about to cry, and rubbed her back, telling her that everything would be all right. But it was hopeless to be stranded on a deserted island. Fortunately, I had portable food in my bag, which would last at least a day or two, but not for a long period of time. Maybe someone would notice us with Isabella being there. I was able to keep my cool. Let's warm up for now. We could catch a cold since we were both wet from snorkeling in the water. I wiped Isabella's hair and body thoroughly with a towel I had brought and dressed her. Together, we brought a number of thin tree branches and gathered dead leaves to make a fire. I was glad I had brought a lighter for something as I lit the fire with the lighter. It gradually spread to the dead leaves and tree branches. In this way, we managed to warm ourselves. But what if help never came? I couldn't shake the feeling of anxiety. It was at that time, about 2 hours after Mason left us, a small boat came towards us. I stood up hurriedly, waved my hands, and shouted help over and over again. The boat stopped near us, and the owner of the boat came over to us. "Are you okay?" he called out to us and motioned for us to get on the boat. The man was a staff member of the boat shop that lent the boat to Mason. While we were on the boat, the man began to explain. He said that when Mason returned the boat to him, Mason and Amelia had left immediately. Right after, he suddenly thought that the number of people who had returned was not right, which made him worry. That's why he came over to the island to check. I was so relieved that I burst into tears. Isabella was sleeping in my arms, probably because she was exhausted from fear. We made it safely back to the island where our hotel was located, and after thanking the people who came to help us, Isabella and I headed back to the hotel. When I got to the hotel, I met Pete in the lobby. "Oh, Sophia, aren't you with my son and wife?" Pete came over to see me, but when he saw how tired I looked, he immediately realized that something was wrong. "Let's sit over there in the lounge," he said. And as we sat down, he listened to what I had to say. I told him that today we were left behind and that Mason has been cold towards Isabella for some time. After listening to me, Pete bowed his head and apologized to me. He told me that he would never forgive what Mason and Amelia had done to us. When I think about it, Pete was the only one who always tried to confirm the truth when Mason suspected that Isabella wasn't his child, and Pete always loved his grandchild. He was my only ally. "Let's teach them a lesson," Pete said. I agreed, and went with him to the front desk of the hotel. Fortunately, Mason and Amelia had not come back to the hotel yet, as they were probably having dinner somewhere. Since I was the one who made the reservation at the hotel, I canceled my stay. Now Mason and Amelia wouldn't be able to stay here. Pete was planning to stay at his friend's place, who lives around here, and he was going to wait for us at the hotel to tell us about it. So Pete said, "Sophia, you should come with me," and took Isabella and me to his friend's house. His friend also had his wife, and they both welcomed us at their place. By that time, Isabella had woken up and was eating a home-cooked meal prepared by them. Then I got a call that Mason and Amelia had been caught by the police. This was because they had made a big fuss about not being able to check in at the hotel. The front desk rushed to report the incident, and the police rushed to the hotel. but they protested aggressively, saying, "We made a reservation." Mason and Amelia probably protested because they didn't want to be taken advantage of. But if you don't obediently follow the police instructions, you can be arrested. They asked for Pete's and my help, but we refused. I told the police that the two had left Isabella and me on a deserted island. The police also took a statement from the staff who lent the boat as evidence. As a result, Mason and Amelia were both charged with a crime and were in quite a difficult situation. My husband panicked and managed to get a lawyer, but he had to pay a large bail amount and lost thousands of dollars overnight. Moreover, they were in jail for several days until they were released on bail, and both Mason and Amelia were exhausted physically and mentally. It's a great feeling to get back at them like this, because if the boat staff had not come at that time, Isabella and I would have suffered much worse. Isabella and I returned home ahead of the others, packed our belongings, and went back to my parents' house. Then I confronted Mason, who returned right after us, with divorce papers through my lawyer, and also demanded alimony for the emotional distress he had caused my daughter and me. At that time, I asked him through my lawyer why he did what he did and why he didn't pay any attention to his own daughter until now. According to the lawyer, Mason told me that he had suddenly lost all love for our daughter once he suspected that she was not his child. I was appalled and shocked to hear this. Even though a proper DNA test had been done, he still couldn't believe that Isabella was his own child. I regretted a little that I should have separated Isabella from such a horrible father way earlier. Mason was left to pay alimony and child support to me after the divorce, which left him in debt. Furthermore, I reported this incident to my former boss, who still works for the same company. So Mason's disgusting behavior quickly spread throughout the company, and he was identified as the guy who tried to leave his wife and child to die. And now it seems like he is feeling very ashamed of himself. He's now in debt, so he can't really quit work, and the stress is getting to him. Pete divorced Amelia because of this incident. Amelia, who had been living on Pete's salary, was thrown out of the house without a job, and she panicked and asked Mason for help. But he refused, saying that he could not afford it. So she's now living in a rundown apartment while working a part-time job. Meanwhile, I got a new job, rented an apartment just big enough for the two of us, and started living with Isabella. Isabella doesn't even think of Mason as her father anymore, and she gives all her affection and love to me. She practices on the piano every day and says things like, "I'm going to win the next competition for you, Mommy. I'm going to work hard and earn money so that Isabella, who is so lovely and kind, can do what she loves with all my power." Leaving them on a deserted island is definitely a crime. I think Mason and Amelia should be in jail, but I am so glad that Pete was a decent man. I hope Sophia will continue to be happy with her daughter Isabella.